They had built their careers on opposite principles. She was precision, he was force, and they had both somehow ended up in exactly the same place. Shirley Bassey sang with control, with the particular discipline of a performer who understood that the most powerful thing a voice could do was arrive at exactly the right moment and stop at exactly the right time. There was nothing accidental in what she did on a stage. Every note was placed deliberately, every phrase shaped with the understanding that excess was a kind of weakness, that the voice that knew what it was doing never needed to prove it. She had learned this not in a conservatory and not from a teacher, but from the specific education that life in Tiger Bay had provided, the education of a child who understood, from a very early age, that precision was the only version of power available to her. Tom Jones had built his world on the opposite of that. Full commitment, nothing held back. The voice as a physical force, directed at whoever was in the room, with a directness that some people found almost difficult to receive. He did not calculate. He delivered. The precision that Shirley had spent her career perfecting was not a discipline he had ever needed to develop, because the approach that came naturally to him, complete, unstinting, total, had worked in every room he had ever stood in. Two completely different philosophies, two completely different ideas about what a Welsh voice could accomplish and how it should accomplish it. In 1968, in Las Vegas, both philosophies were at the peak of their power. And for one night, they occupied the same building. Las Vegas in 1968 was the center of a world that had not existed 20 years earlier and would not exist in its current form 20 years later. A world organized around the performance of live music for audiences who had traveled specifically to experience what the large showroom could do to a person. The Strip had its own hierarchy, its own internal logic, its own understanding of what a headliner was supposed to be. To be a headliner in Las Vegas in 1968 was not simply to be famous. It was to be the kind of performer who could sustain a large room, night after night, with nothing but a voice and a stage. The showroom was unforgiving in a way that the recording studio and the television broadcast were not. A record could be edited. A television appearance could be controlled. A live showroom at full capacity 6 nights a week for weeks at a time could not be managed or shaped or corrected after the fact. It simply happened, in real time, in front of people who had come specifically to experience it. Very few performers in the world could meet that requirement. Both Tom Jones and Shirley Bassey were among them, and both had arrived there from places that had given them no particular reason to believe they ever would. Shirley Bassey had arrived at this position by a route that deserved to be understood rather than summarized. She had grown up in Tiger Bay, a Docklands neighborhood in Cardiff that sat at the edge of the city proper, as if the city had preferred not to think about it too carefully. It was a community shaped by the sea trade, populated by sailors and dock workers from across the world, producing a particular mixture of cultures and a particular quality of hardship that the rest of Wales had not shared. Shirley was the youngest of 7 children, born to a Nigerian father and an English mother, raised in poverty in a neighborhood that the rest of Cardiff regarded with condescension. She had left school at 14 to work in a factory. She had begun singing in local working men's clubs while she was still a teenager, in rooms that were not designed to make things easy for anyone, least of all for a young black woman from the docks asking to be heard. What she had developed in those rooms was not a style. It was a survival strategy. Precision was not an aesthetic choice for Shirley Bassey. It was the only approach that worked in a world that was not designed to give her room to make mistakes. A white male singer could afford a rough night. A black woman from Tiger Bay could not. Every performance had to be perfect. Every note had to be placed. Every entrance and exit had to be timed with an accuracy that left no opening for dismissal. She had learned this lesson early and completely, and by the time she arrived in Las Vegas, the discipline had become so deep that it was no longer visible as discipline. It simply appeared as authority, as inevitability, as the particular quality of a voice that seemed to know exactly what it was doing, because it had never been permitted not to. By 1968, she had recorded Goldfinger, the James Bond theme that had made her name known in America, with a precision that matched the song itself. She was one of the most recognizable voices in the world, and she was, in Las Vegas, exactly the kind of performer the city had been designed to celebrate: controlled, powerful, immaculate. Tom Jones had been in Las Vegas for less than a year when this particular night arrived. He was 28 years old. He had come from Pontypridd, a mining valley in South Wales, 40 miles from Tiger Bay by road, but a different world in almost every other sense. His father had worked underground. The community he had grown up in was white, Welsh-speaking in its older generation, organized around the mine and the chapel and the particular male culture of a place where physical strength was the primary currency. He had not grown up in poverty of the Tiger Bay kind, but he had grown up in the specific working-class Welsh reality of a place that did not prepare its children for stages in Nevada. The valley towns of South Wales were not places from which Las Vegas headliners were expected to emerge. They were places from which miners emerged, and rugby players, and men who sang in choirs because the choir was the only stage the community provided. Tom Jones had used that choir as a starting point and kept going long after the valley had run out of room for what his voice required. He had simply sung since he was very young, with a voice that people stopped what they were doing to listen to, and he had followed that voice to where it led, through small venues and modest engagements, and a recording contract that had produced It's Not Unusual, and then Las Vegas, and then a headliner's name on a marquee that he had not yet quite grown accustomed to seeing. What Tom and Shirley had in common was not their technique. It was not their approach to a song, not their philosophy of performance, not their understanding of what a stage required. What they had in common was Wales, and the particular unspoken knowledge of what it meant to have come from Wales and ended up here. Neither of them had been expected to arrive in Las Vegas. Neither of them had been assisted in any meaningful way by an industry that had looked at where they came from and seen a headliner. They had gotten here by the specific force of their own voices, through a series of rooms that had grown progressively larger until the rooms were the size of Las Vegas showrooms. The journey had been the same in its shape, if not in its texture, and the cost had been the same in its magnitude, if not in its specific form. When they found themselves briefly in the same backstage space that evening, the exact circumstances reconstructed from the memories of people who were present, the kind of accounts that tend to differ in their details while agreeing on their emotional truth, there was a specific quality to the conversation that people who witnessed it later described as something other than professional courtesy. It was not the exchange of two celebrities acknowledging each other's fame. It was something quieter and more specific than that. Shirley spoke first. She had a way of opening a conversation that reflected the same quality as her singing: direct, precise, unhurried, without any of the social decoration that performances of celebrity tended to require. What she said was not about the performance Tom had just given, though she had seen part of it. It was about something underneath the performance, about where the voice came from, about what it required to stand on a Las Vegas stage when you were the kind of person that Las Vegas had not originally designed those stages for. Tom listened. There was a particular quality to the way Tom Jones listened when something mattered, a stillness that was not common in him, a suspension of the energy that normally moved through him continuously, an opening. He listened in the way he listened when something was being said that he recognized as true. Not simply agreeable, but true, in the specific sense of a statement that names something that has been present and unspoken for a long time. He had been in Las Vegas for less than a year, and he had spent most of that year performing rather than reflecting, which is what Las Vegas required of its headliners. The question of where he had come from and what it had cost to get here was not a question the city paused to ask. Shirley was asking it, or rather, she was not asking it so much as stating quietly that she already knew the answer and that she assumed he did too. What passed between them in those few minutes was not a long conversation, and it was not a sentimental one. Shirley Bassey did not deal in sentiment. Tom Jones, for all his emotional directness on stage, was not a man who found it easy to receive recognition of the kind that required acknowledging difficulty. But the exchange was real in a way that both of them would reference, in different contexts and with different degrees of directness, for years afterward. They had come from the same 40-mile stretch of South Wales. They had taken entirely different routes out of it. They had arrived, by those different routes, at the same destination, the most demanding live performance environment in the world, at the peak of what it could offer. And what Shirley recognized in Tom, and what Tom recognized in Shirley, was not the technique and not the fame and not the Vegas persona that each had assembled. It was the Wales underneath all of that. The specific, indelible quality of having come from a place that had not prepared you for where you were standing. The conversation ended the way backstage conversations in Las Vegas tend to end, with the movement of other people, the resumption of the evening's ordinary demands, the return to the separate rooms and the separate obligations that a headlining engagement required. Tom went back to what the night required of him. Shirley went back to what the night required of her. The building continued as Las Vegas buildings continued, full of noise and light and the particular energy of a city that did not stop. But the thing that had passed between them, the specific recognition, the naming of something that the world around them had no particular language for, was not a thing that either of them forgot. Both of them would perform for decades more. Both of them would accumulate further honors, further reinventions, further chapters in careers that had already lasted longer than anyone watching in 1968 would have predicted. Through all of it, the Wales remained. It was not something either of them performed or announced. It was simply there, in the voice, in the refusal to accept any room as too large or too small, in the particular endurance of people who had started with nothing and had turned that nothing into the only instrument they would ever need. Precision and force. Two opposite philosophies of performance built from the same Welsh earth, standing briefly in the same Las Vegas corridor, understanding each other in the specific way that people understand each other when the understanding does not require explanation. The distance between Tiger Bay and Pontypridd is 40 miles. The distance between what both of them had come from and where they were standing that night was something that could not be measured in miles at all. But it had been traveled, by both of them, at enormous cost. And on this one evening in a Las Vegas backstage corridor, the only two people in the building who fully understood that cost had found each other, and had, briefly, said so.